In today's video, we're going to go over something that we use with all our children as kind of a theoretical foundation or theoretical framework of explaining our kiddos' behavior and what we can do to help change it. And so we have come up with this thing that we like to call the triangulation of behavior. And a better term might be triangulation of performance. And so this is a child's functional performance. How do they complete things, whether it's self-help skills, whether it's getting their homework done, whether it's being part of the family and engaging in appropriate interactions. And what we've kind of discovered or come up over with time is there's really three critical components to this. And one is going to be cognitive ability. So what is a baseline of ability? Just like a basketball player like Michael Jordan has incredible athletic ability, we all have different levels of ability to process information, both in terms of speed, how much memory, all those different pieces come together. And there's two pieces to that. We can use that as a tool, but we also need to understand where it is in order to get a feel for how that child's performing. And we kind of see three different areas that come into play. One I talked about, just what's that underlying ability. The second is previous exposure. So if you grew up in a household where lots of books were read, where there was a lot of engagement, you did jigsaw puzzles and played games, you're going to have a different outcome than if you grew up in a house where the television was on for 10 hours a day. Or one of the research studies on the children in Romania that grew up in orphanages, their IQ on average is 10 points lower than a child that did not grow up in one of those orphanages. And then relevance. And this relevance is an interesting piece. So in learning theory, there's a term called schemata theory. If something isn't interesting to me, I'm not going to pay attention to it. I always use the example of sewing. I can't stand sewing. I want nothing to do with sewing. I can't imagine having to learn how to sew. But if you ask me to build something like equipment in the gym, I can talk about it all day long. It's relevant. I'm willing to learn it. So that's one of the factors in functional performance. Another is emotional control or emotional, just underlying emotional regulation. And so, again, if a child gets upset very quickly over something very simple, they can't regulate those emotions, it's going to have a massive impact on functional performance. And this is what brings many children to our clinic, is severe temper tantrums, difficulty staying on task, sometimes aggression. That emotion just kicks in and really drives and impacts this overall functional performance. And so again, we look at three areas of emotional control. You always have to look at a child's history, and we don't really look at that in depth, and a lot of times it's hard to really delve into. Was there some trauma? Was there something, were they in the NICU for a long time, and it just really kind of changed how they process things? But that history is one piece. Another part is learned, and this is learned behavior. And so if every time I scream, I get something, I'm going to scream more. And so parents, myself included, are often guilty of being cornered into this response without even knowing that's what's happening. And as a child, my children learned, well, if I just do this, then I won't have to do that. And then finally, it's just, underlying genetics. In genetics, a lot of times we'll look at, is there an underlying emotional regulation issue? Is there a history of mental illness of some level, of attention problems, of all those things? So we kind of look at that all kind of impacting a child's emotional response. And that in turn can really impact functional performance. And finally, and this is probably one of the biggest areas we work on here, is sensory processing. And that is, how do we bring in information from the environment, external information as well as the internal information from our body, which is the vestibular system, my balance, and proprioception, which is the pressure on my muscles and joints. those two together kind of give my body an awareness of, oh, here I am. Whereas the external senses look at the environment around me. So that's a lot of what we look at. And kind of the three components we see of that is an individual system profile. So you can measure that with something called the sensory processing measure. Child doesn't like noises, child seeks out movement, all those different individual sensory type things. We also look at environmental considerations. What kind of environment are you in? What kind of environment kind of spikes that system? And that does have a lot to do with an individual system profile up here. And then the other big piece is just baseline neurological coordination. And so we look at foundational, kind of a foundational neurological hierarchy as we look at children, and starting with primitive reflex integration, going through the visual, auditory, tactile system. I'm sorry, not that was a mistake. Going through the proprioceptive, vestibular, and tactile systems, and then finally getting into vision and auditory. We kind of look at that forward progression, and really looking at where is that child neurologically, which system isn't working, and that is going to have a massive impact on functional performance. We see a lot of children with reading problems that come through here, and when you start looking at one of those systems, whether it's reflex integration, whether it's auditory processing difficulties, it's dramatically impacting how they bring in information, which in turn is going to impact functional performance. So here at Sensory Academic Solutions, we are constantly looking at not what a child is doing. School can measure that, the parents can tell you that, but we try to get to why. And that's where all of these come in, and that is the purpose for kind of looking at this through the triangulation of behavior or triangulation of performance.